Okay, what happened?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Rosen Rabini podcast, Making Sense of This World. My name is Modest Chavla, and as always, I'm really pleased to be joined by CEO and Head of Research, Brunella Rosa. This week, we're discussing the G20 summit, which happened in New Delhi, which I got to attend, and something that the entire world's eyes were on very much as it made headlines for a number of different reasons. Brunello, can we start off by giving the sort of viewers a bit of a bird's eye view? Why was this meeting in particular of the G20 important given the context, the geopolitical situation, this sort of particular time of the year?
It's particularly important what happened in New Delhi, we believe, because ahead of the meeting, there were real big fears that the leaders would not agree on a joint statement, as it happened in Indonesia a few months back. And that's because the G20, like all multilateral institutions, are now, I would say, divided, but one could say even balkanized between the friends of China and the friends of the US. So the UN Security Council is hostage of this conflict, let's call it that way. And the G20 is not different. So there were widely divergent views on the world, on the global economy, how things should develop from a geopolitical perspective, on the interpretation of events. So there was a real risk that in these occasions, they would not be able to come up with a statement.
Yeah. There was a lot of uncertainty about whether or not, as you mentioned, a statement would end up coming out. We did get one, and perhaps the most polarizing aspect of it were the sort of paragraph 7 to 11, the geopolitical paragraphs, specifically mentioning or not mentioning the war in Ukraine. Could you speak a bit more about that?
Absolutely. Clearly, this G20 was characterized by Xi's absence, and that was a bit to somehow uh, remark the distance with Modi, who's organizing, of course, this meeting. Even after a huge geopolitical victory that she obtained at the recent BRICS meeting with the enlargement, where most countries wanted enter the enlarged BRICS gathering. In spite of all this, she effectively wanted to mark a distance with Modi. And of course, the big ally of Xi in this period, Russia's Putin, couldn't go there uh, uh, for obvious reasons, considering there's a arrest warrant hanging on his head. So without Xi and Putin there, it was hard for anybody to kind of explicitly mention Russia's aggression of Ukraine, or what even the ECB, the European Central Banks, called the unjustified aggression. So a compromise needed to be reached, and eventually was reached by excluding the paragraph on Russia and Ukraine and substituting that with something much softer that says that all states must refrain from the threat or use of force to seek territorial acquisition against the territorial integrity and sovereignty or political independence of any state. So it's clearly what's going on in Ukraine with the aggression of Russia. But none of the two countries is mentioned. This clearly made Zelensky infuriating, probably helped the Russian delegation to say that they scored a goal. It was a compromise, but when you have a compromise, you have to give up something.
Absolutely. Another important development from the summit was the signing of an MOU, specifically one on sort of large infrastructure investment that would connect India, Middle East, and Europe. What was that all about, and how likely is it to be successful?
Yeah, so in spite of all problems behind the communique, we think three important results were achieved. The first one is the one that you just mentioned, and we discussed the other two in a second, and it's the fact that a number of countries, the US, Saudi Arabia, India, the UAE, France, and others, have signed an MOU to establish what is being called the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. It's effectively a railway network that will connect in a reliable and cost-effective way the ship-to-rail transit, effectively allowing goods to be transported first ships, then move to rail, move to ships, move to rail. So in a smooth and a cost-effective way from India up to the Middle East, Persian Gulf, Egypt, and then clearly down to Europe, so Italy, France, and Germany. So it's a way of effectively establishing an alternative of the Western economies to the Belt and Road Initiative. Effectively, it would be the infrastructure backup of the PGII, the so-called Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment, which is what the G7 has launched to oppose the BRI initiative of China, the 600 billions to be invested in global infrastructure. And so this investment will be supported logistically by this new kind of corridor that goes from India to Eastern Europe.
Sure. And secondly, one key geopolitical relationship this summit was really important for was that between India and the United States. Was this strengthened by the summit, would you say?
Yeah. So we have discussed several times that in this rivalry between US and China, there are several countries that will have to choose which sides to say. And India is one of those who could afford to stay a bit in the middle. It was hedging its bets. But I must confess that in the last few months, a few things have happened that is convincing me that India will side more with the US rather than Russia and China, in spite of the fact that Modi has deployed some more, I would say, autocratic features, nationalistic, and so on. So there is something that make him resemble more to the authoritarian regimes of China, Russia, and so on. However, in his recent visit to Washington, he was warmly welcomed by Joe Biden, and they signed a series of agreements on technological transfer, the purchase of drones made by US by India, and then investment that US will do in microprocessor producing factories in India. So these were initial agreements that were signed and reinforced during the meeting and the sidelines of the G20 meetings in Delhi. And that is strengthening, I would say, the close and enduring partnership that the two countries have. And that would kind of suggest, together to the fact that we discussed in the past, India is part of the Artemis mission in the space race that is now ongoing again between US and China. India has decided to side with the US. So all these things tend to suggest that India is now turning more towards the US and its camp than to China and Russia. And the fact that Biden said that he would return in 2024 to New Delhi for a meeting of the Quad, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue with Australia and Japan, suggests that this partnership will be strengthened further coming forward.
Absolutely. And there's another crucial meeting that happened while we're speaking about China's influence. There's one between the Chinese Premier Li Qiang and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. What came of that meeting?
Yeah, I mean, there was this huge issue. In 2019, Italy signed, first of the G7 countries, an MOU to adhere to the Belt and Road Initiative, something that made the US infuriating because, of course, how can a G7 country somehow betray its traditional allies to side with China? That was a totally different government. It was a government led by Conte and supported by the Five Stars and Lega. Was a sort of anti-system government that clearly was not meant to last. In fact, it didn't, and it collapsed a couple of years later. But the damage was done, the MOU was signed. The MOU did not deliver what was expected, in particular an increase of export by Italy to China from 2.5 billion to 20. In reality, it stayed around 3, which means that it has not delivered what was promised. And so Meloni has signaled to his counterpart Li Qiang that this MOU will not be renewed. But then, of course, Italy doesn't want to break all the relationship with China. It's still an important country, a country from which to import and where to export, especially luxury goods. Which is the reason why the government, with his foreign minister Tajani, has decided to revive the global strategic partnership that was signed in 2004, so effectively in 2004, between China and Italy. At that time, the prime minister was Silvio Berlusconi. And then, as the communique says, that would be the beacon of the advancement of friendship and cooperation in every area of a common interest, which, honestly, it seems a bit generic, and in fact, it's probably generic, but is what Italy managed to revive as a counterpart. Say, sorry, guys, can't be in the BRI anymore. Clearly, the world has changed, and in this polarized world, I need to stay with my traditional allies of the G7, and in particular the US.
Absolutely. So a lot there to sort of unpack, but definitely a very kind of consequential, G20 summit. And that's not even to mention the fact that, for the first time in its 18-year history, membership was expanded to include a new player, the African Union, which represents 55 African countries and now raises the G20's total representation 90% of the world's population. So certainly quite sort of a packed weekend, but one that'll have consequences for the years to come that we'll watch closely. As always, Brunel, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you. Until next time.